Hello and thanks for joining us for today's video. We're going to take a look at three fugitives who were on the lam for decades and then they turned themselves in out of the blue. But we want to tell you about the latest video from our other channel, Paranormally Listed, that we think fans of true crime will like. It's about three killers who were haunted by their victims. One of the cases we cover is one of the most infamous cases in modern England. We'll have a link to the video at the end of this video, and there's also a link in the description box below. Before we get any further, we just want to bring you a word from our amazing sponsor, Magellan TV. Magellan TV has a lot of great documentaries in different genres, so I find the best way to find something new to watch is to check out their new releases section. That's how I found the series, Death Row: Faces of Evil. It's a 6-part series about the history of capital punishment in the United States. Each episode is excellent and insightful, but I really enjoyed the second and third episodes the best. They're about executing serial killers. But like I said, the entire series is great. My only real problem with it is that there are only 6 episodes, and I wish there were more. So if you have Magellan TV, I highly recommend checking out Death Row: Faces of Evil. If you don't have Magellan TV, the series is worth signing up for. Besides Death Row: Faces of Evil, they have over 3,000 documentaries in genres like science, history, and arts and culture, so you're bound to find a bunch of documentaries that are fascinating. Magellan TV has a great offer for criminally listed viewers. They are offering our viewers 30 days of free service. To get this amazing offer, just go to try.magellantv.com/criminally listed. So please check out Magellan TV today because you'll find something great to watch and you'll be supporting criminally listed in the process. Number 3. Grant Mitchell. In May 1987, 19-year-old Nella Celeste Poley was living in Zetland, a suburb of Sydney, Australia, with her partner, 37-year-old Grant Mitchell. Both Poley and Mitchell were originally from New Zealand. They met in Sydney and they had been dating for about 8 months. They had been living in a cottage for about 6 months. Mitchell was a stock controller and Poley was a barmaid at a hotel. But in early May 1987, Poley decided to end the relationship. On May 13, 1987, 19-year-old Nella Poley didn't show up for work. Her mother went over to her home. With the help of a neighbor, she got inside the cottage. She found the dead body of her daughter in the bedroom. The police were called. They determined that Poley had been strangled to death. Close to her body, the police found a photo of her with her head ripped off. Notably missing from the cottage was 37-year-old Grant Mitchell. When the police couldn't find him, he quickly became their prime suspect. But he was nowhere to be found. Australia's Most Wanted did a segment on Grant Mitchell. Not long after the reenactment was recorded, actress Cate Blanchett moved into the cottage. This was several years before she became a successful actress. She found out about the murder when she saw the Australia's Most Wanted segment about the murder. She wanted to move out after she found out about the murder, but she couldn't afford it. Over 2 decades went by. Then, on January 11, 2011, 24 years after the murder, 61-year-old Grant Mitchell walked into a police station in Queensland and gave himself up. Mitchell said that he and Poley had a fight on the night of the murder. Mitchell had previously given Poley a pendant and she wore it on a chain around her neck. She put the pendant in her mouth. Mitchell tried to get her to spit it out by wrapping his hands around her neck. But that didn't work. So he grabbed a pair of pantyhose and started strangling her. This led to them falling to the floor. He then grabbed a pillow and smothered her. Once he was done, he ripped the head off her photo and fled. For the next 24 years, he did manual jobs for cash. He tried to have no contact with government officials. Eventually, he took over an abandoned cottage in Irvine Bank, an old mining town. He lived as a recluse. When people would come near his cottage, he hid under the floorboards. In October 2010, Mitchell was riding a motorized bicycle and he collided with a kangaroo. This resulted in him being hospitalized for 10 days with a head injury. He gave the hospital a false name. The problem was that since he had given the hospital a false name, he couldn't claim the cost through Medicare. So he was left with an $11,000 bill for the hospital stay. He ended up running away from the hospital without discussing the payment. Then 4 months later, he turned himself in to the police. In June 2012, Grant Mitchell made a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to murder, and he was sentenced to 14 years in prison with a minimum of 10 years before he could apply for parole. This means he was able to apply for parole in 2022. Grant Mitchell's current whereabouts are unknown. Number 2. Robert Van Wisse. On the night of September 19, 1983, 22-year-old Laurie Stout was working at the University of Texas in Austin. Stout was married and had an 18-month-old daughter. The next morning, her dead body was found in a men's washroom in one of the buildings on campus. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled with an electrical cord, and smothered with wads of toilet paper. The building was locked while Stout was working inside of it, and only a few people were in the building at the time of the murder. Also, not many people had access to the building after it was locked. The police questioned everyone who was in the building that night and everyone who could access the building after it was locked. They also collected fingerprints and blood samples from those people, but they were all eliminated as suspects. The case ultimately went cold. 9 years later, in 1992, the case was reopened. The cold case investigator re-examined the evidence and found something unusual. It turned out DNA testing had been done, but the type of DNA testing that was done was outdated, and that method was no longer considered reliable. So the DNA was tested again. Then, in October 1996, the police issued an arrest warrant for 31-year-old Robert Van Wisse. Van Wisse was an 18-year-old student at the time of the murder. He was in the building when the murder occurred because he was registering for a late class. His fingerprints were found in the washroom where the body was found and on the fire exit door near the washroom. Most importantly, his DNA was matched to the DNA left behind from the sexual assault. But when the police went to arrest Van Wisse, he was gone. In March 1997, Van Wisse was charged with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, and a federal arrest warrant was issued for him. Van Wisse came from a well-to-do family who owned multiple properties in Guatemala and Mexico. So Van Wisse managed to stay on the lam for years. Then in December 2006, Robert Van Wisse was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. When this happened, Van Wisse thought that the authorities were closing in on him. It turned out that Van Wisse had been hiding out in Mexico. So, 34 years after the murder, on January 26, 2017, 52-year-old Robert Van Wisse went to the border in Laredo, Texas, where his lawyer arranged for him to surrender to an FBI agent. In a court appearance, Van Wisse maintained he was never violent before the murder and he has not been violent since. Van Wisse made a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to murder and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. At the time of this recording, 57-year-old Robert Van Wisse is serving his sentence at the William P. Clements Unit in Amarillo, Texas. He'll be able to apply for parole in January 2027 when he's 62 years old. Number 1. Clarence David Moore. In 1967, in North Carolina, 18-year-old Clarence David Moore was convicted of larceny of more than $200. He was sentenced to a maximum of 7 years in prison. In 1971, he was working with a prison road crew in the Asheville, North Carolina area. He managed to escape, but he was recaptured hours later. In June 1972, he escaped from prison. This time, he spent nearly 3 years on the lam. Then he was arrested again in 1975 in Texas. He was put in prison in Henderson County, Texas, but Moore wouldn't stay there long. On August 6, 1976, he escaped for the third time. This time, he would stay on the lam for a long time. On April 20th, 2015, 39 years after his escape, Clarence Moore, now 66 years old, called the sheriff's department in Franklin County, Kentucky. He said he was ready to turn himself in. Moore broke down crying, saying he wanted to put his past behind him. At first, the sheriff thought he was kidding, but then he looked at Moore's record and learned he was wanted for escaping from prison in 1976. Moore lived in Frankfort, Kentucky, and the sheriff went to his home to arrest him. Moore's living girlfriend was shocked when she opened the door and found the sheriff standing there. She had no idea that Moore was a wanted fugitive. Moore explained that after escaping, he eventually settled in Frankfort under the name Ronnie Dixon. In recent years, he suffered from several health problems. This included a stroke that left him paralyzed on the right side of his body. The stroke made it difficult for him to talk. Since he didn't have a social security number, he couldn't get the help he needed. This was one of the reasons he wanted to turn himself in. After Moore turned himself in after 39 years, the sheriff said he made some bad choices, but at the end of the day, he wanted to make them right, and he stepped up. It's unclear what happened to 66-year-old Clarence Moore after he turned himself in. He was brought to a hospital, and he was medically cleared to go to a jail in Kentucky. He was supposed to be transferred to a jail in North Carolina, but it's unclear if that ever happened, and his current status is unknown. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed. There's a link on the screen now, and there's a link in the description box below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.